A 6-year-old girl found a baby abandoned among trash bags in the rain. She took him home and begged her mother to keep him. They raised him as family for 10 years, even though they had almost nothing. Then one day, a powerful CEO knocked on their door. What he said changed everything. Welcome to another incredible story. Say life in the comments, let us know your city, and subscribe to be part of our growing community. The rain fell without mercy that gray October afternoon, turning the dirt roads into rivers of mud and the sky into a ceiling of pewter clouds. 6-year-old Molly Parker didn't mind the rain. She liked the way it drummed against her pink hoodie, the way it made the world smell clean and fresh, the way it turned ordinary puddles into miniature oceans for her imagination to explore. She was walking home from school, taking the long way because she wanted to look for treasures. Molly was always looking for treasures. Her mother said she had the eyes of a crow, always spotting shiny things and interesting objects that other people walked right past. Today's route took her past the old dump site at the edge of town, where people who couldn't afford proper waste disposal left their garbage in heaps that grew larger every week. It wasn't a nice place, not really. But Molly had found some of her best treasures there. A brass button that she wore on a string around her neck. A broken music box that still played half a tune when she turned the crank. A book about dinosaurs with most of the pages still intact. She was scanning the edges of the trash pile looking for anything that sparkled, when she heard it. A sound, small and weak and almost lost in the patter of rain. A cry. Molly stopped, her small body going still as she listened. There it was again. Not a cat, not a bird. Something else, something that sounded like a baby. Her heart began to pound as she moved toward the sound, picking her way carefully between bags of garbage and piles of plastic bottles. The cry grew louder, more insistent, and Molly followed it like a beacon until she rounded a heap of broken furniture and saw something that made her blood run cold. A baby, a real live baby, sitting in a shallow puddle among the trash, wearing nothing but a green onesie that was soaked through with rain and mud. The baby's face was red and scrunched with crying, tiny fists waving in the air, bare feet kicking against the wet ground. For a moment, Molly couldn't move. Her mind couldn't process what she was seeing. Babies didn't appear in garbage dumps. Babies were supposed to be in cribs and strollers in their mother's arms. Not here. Not like this. Not in the middle of the rain and the mud and the rotting garbage. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. Someone had put this baby here. Someone had looked at this tiny, innocent creature and decided to throw him away like trash. Molly felt something stir inside her, something fierce and protective that she had never felt before. It was like a fire igniting in her chest, burning away her confusion and fear, leaving behind nothing but determination. The baby was real. The baby was cold. The baby needed help. And Molly Parker, all 6 years and 40 pounds of her, was the only one there to give it. There was no one else. No adults, no police, no firefighters rushing to the rescue. Just a little girl in a pink hoodie, standing in the rain, facing a decision that would change her life forever. She didn't hesitate, not for a second. She ran forward and knelt beside the baby, her pink hoodie instantly soaking through as she gathered the tiny creature into her arms. The baby was so small, so light, like holding a loaf of bread wrapped in wet fabric. Its cry softened slightly at the warmth of her body, but it was shivering, its little lips tinged with blue. "It's okay," Molly whispered, pulling the baby close to her chest. "It's okay. I've got you. You're safe now." She could feel his tiny heart beating against her own, rapid and frightened like a bird trapped in a cage. His little fingers clutched at her hoodie, seeking warmth, seeking safety, seeking the human connection that every child needs to survive. Molly looked around frantically, hoping to see someone, anyone, who could help. But the dump was deserted. The rain was falling harder now, turning the world into a gray blur of water and mud. She was alone with this baby, this miracle child who had somehow survived being thrown away like garbage. She needed to get him warm. She needed to get him inside. She needed to tell her mother, who always knew what to do, who always made everything better, even when things seemed impossible. "I'm going to take you home," she told the baby, her voice firm despite the fear coursing through her veins. I'm going to take you to my mama. She'll know what to do. She's a nurse. She fixes people. The baby's cries had softened to whimpers now, as if he understood somehow that he was no longer alone. Molly tucked him inside her pink hoodie, pressing him against her chest where he could feel her heartbeat, where he could absorb her warmth. She didn't know what else to do, so she did the only thing that made sense. She ran. The Parker house was a small, weather-worn cottage at the end of a dirt road, with a sagging porch and windows that let in the cold, and a garden that Helen Parker tended with more hope than success. It wasn't much, but it was home. Helen was in the kitchen when she heard the front door burst open, followed by the sound of her daughter's voice, high and frantic. "Mama! Mama, come quick!" She dropped the pot she was scrubbing and ran to the front room, her heart in her throat. When she saw Molly standing in the doorway, soaking wet and clutching something to her chest, her first thought was that her daughter had found an injured animal. A kitten, maybe, or a puppy. Then she looked closer, and the world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "Molly, what? Is that a baby?" "I found him, Mama. Molly's voice was trembling, whether from cold or shock or both. "In the dump. Someone left him in the dump with the garbage. He was all alone and crying and cold, and I had to bring him home. I had to." Helen crossed the room in 3 quick strides and took the baby from her daughter's arms. The child was indeed real, indeed alive, though barely from the look of him. His skin was pale where it wasn't red from crying, and his little body was shaking with cold. "Get me blankets," Helen ordered, her nurse's training from years ago kicking in automatically. "All the blankets from my bed and put water on to boil." Molly ran to obey, and Helen carried the baby to the old couch by the fireplace. She stripped off the wet onesie and wrapped the baby in a dry towel from the bathroom, rubbing gently to stimulate circulation. The child whimpered but didn't cry, too exhausted to do more than that. "You're all right," Helen murmured, her voice soft and steady despite the chaos in her mind. "You're all right, little one, I've got you." By the time Molly returned with armfuls of blankets, Helen had the baby bundled up and warming by the fire she had quickly built. The child's color was improving, the blue tint fading from his lips, his breathing becoming more regular. "Is he going to be okay?" Molly asked, hovering anxiously at her mother's elbow. "I think so. He's cold and probably hungry, but he doesn't seem injured." Helen looked at her daughter, really looked at her for the first time since this craziness began. Molly was soaked through, her brown hair plastered to her face, her pink hoodie dripping onto the floor. But her eyes were bright with concern, fixed on the baby in Helen's arms. "You said you found him in the dump?" Molly nodded. "He was just sitting there, in the mud and the rain. Someone left him there like garbage." Helen felt a wave of fury wash over her, so intense it nearly stole her breath. Who could do this? Who could take a baby, an innocent, helpless baby, and abandon it in a pile of trash? "We need to call the police," she said, though even as the words left her mouth, she felt something shift inside her. "No." Molly's voice was sharp, almost panicked. "Mama, no. They'll take him away. They'll put him in one of those places, the ones where nobody loves you and you sleep in big rooms with other kids who don't have families. Molly, sweetheart. He needs us, Mama. Can't you see he needs a family? We can be his family." Molly grabbed her mother's arm, her small fingers digging in with surprising strength. "Please, Mama. Please, can we keep him? I'll help take care of him. I'll share everything with him. I'll be the best big sister ever. Please." Helen looked at her daughter's face, so earnest and determined. Then she looked at the baby in her arms, now sleeping peacefully, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. They had nothing. Less than nothing, really. Helen worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on and food on the table. Their house was falling apart. Their future was uncertain at best. But looking at this baby, this abandoned child who had been thrown away like trash, Helen felt something stir in her heart, something fierce and protective and utterly illogical. "We need to at least report it," she said finally. "The police need to know that someone abandoned a baby, but what?" Molly's eyes were huge with hope. "But if no one comes forward to claim him, if they can't find his parents?" Helen took a deep breath. Then we'll see. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either, and for Molly that was enough. The police came that night, a tired-looking officer who took down Helen's statement and examined the baby with a flashlight, as if he might have some identifying information tattooed on his tiny body. "We'll put out an alert," the officer said. "See if anyone reports a missing baby. In the meantime, Child Protective Services will." "No." Helen's voice was firm. "He stays here." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, there are procedures. I'm a trained nurse. I can care for him properly, and this child has been through enough trauma for one day. He doesn't need to be shuffled around to strangers." Helen met the officer's eyes without flinching. "He stays here." Whether it was the steel in her voice or the simple practicality of her argument, the officer relented. He took some photographs, asked a few more questions, and left with a promise to be in touch if they learned anything. They never did. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. No one came forward to claim the baby. No one reported a missing child matching his description. The police investigation turned up nothing. No leads, no suspects, no explanations for how a healthy infant had ended up abandoned in a garbage dump. It was as if he had appeared out of thin air, a gift from the universe deposited among the garbage for Molly Parker to find. During those first few months, Helen threw herself into caring for the baby with an intensity that surprised even herself. She had been a nurse once, years ago, before she had to quit to raise Molly after her husband left. Those skills came back to her now, rusty but still functional, as she monitored the baby's temperature and feeding schedule and developmental milestones. She also started doing research. Hours spent at the library, poring over old newspapers and police reports, trying to find any mention of a missing infant that might match the one sleeping in the makeshift crib by her bed. She contacted hospitals and adoption agencies and social workers, asking questions that had no answers. Nothing. It was as if this baby had never existed before the moment Molly pulled him from the garbage. Helen named him Daniel, after her father, a man who had died when she was barely older than Molly was now. Daniel Parker. It felt right somehow. A new beginning built on the foundation of the past, and slowly, carefully, he became part of their family. The adoption was finalized a year later, after mountains of paperwork and home visits and legal proceedings that Helen could barely afford. But she managed, working extra shifts and selling things she didn't need and accepting help from neighbors who could see how much this meant to her. And through it all, Molly was there, the best big sister ever, just as she had promised. She helped feed Daniel and change him and rock him to sleep. She read him stories before he could understand the words. She defended him against bullies at school who made fun of him for being adopted. "He's my brother," she would say, her small chin jutting out defiantly. "I found him and I saved him and he's mine." No one could argue with that. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. Helen worked long hours at the diner and even longer hours at the cleaning company, scrubbing floors and toilets in office buildings while her children slept. She came home exhausted most nights, her hands raw from chemicals and her feet aching from standing. But she never complained. She had 2 mouths to feed now, 2 futures to secure, and she would do whatever it took to give her children the life they deserved. Molly grew up faster than she should have, taking on responsibilities that most children her age couldn't even imagine. She learned to cook simple meals and do laundry and help Daniel with his homework. She learned to stretch a dollar until it screamed for mercy, to find joy in small things, to be grateful for what they had instead of bitter about what they lacked. And Daniel thrived. He was a happy child, full of laughter and curiosity, with no idea of the darkness that had marked his first months of life. He called Helen Mom and Molly Sissy, and the small shabby house at the end of the dirt road was the only home he had ever known. He had nightmares sometimes, vague and formless terrors that woke him screaming in the night. Helen would hold him then, rocking him back to sleep, whispering that he was safe, that she would never let anything bad happen to him. She never told him the truth about how he had come to be part of their family. Neither did Molly. They had decided together, when Daniel was still a toddler, that some stories were better left untold. He would learn the truth someday when he was old enough to understand it. But not yet. Not now. For now he was just Daniel Parker, a boy with a mother who loved him and a sister who would fight dragons for him, and a life that, despite its hardships, was full of warmth and belonging. 10 years passed. The Parker house hadn't changed much except for a few more patches on the roof and a little more wear on the furniture. Helen still worked 2 jobs, though her back complained more than it used to. The garden still struggled to produce anything edible. The windows still let in the cold. But the house was full of laughter and love and the chaos of raising 2 children, which made everything else seem unimportant. Molly was 16 now, tall and slender with her mother's kind eyes and a stubborn streak that came from somewhere deep in her own soul. She was a junior at the local high school, earning good grades despite having to help out at home whenever she wasn't in class. Daniel was 10, a bright-eyed boy with dark hair and a smile that could light up a room. He was curious about everything, always asking questions, always wanting to know how things worked and why things happened. He had no memory of being found in a garbage dump, no recollection of the first year of his life. As far as he knew, he had always been a Parker. On this particular afternoon, Molly was walking Daniel home from school, the same route she had taken that fateful day a decade ago. The old dump site had been cleaned up years ago, turned into a small community park with swings and a slide. But Molly still thought about it sometimes, about how different everything could have been if she had taken a different path that day. "Molly?" Daniel tugged at her sleeve. "Can we get ice cream?" "We don't have money for ice cream, Danny. But it's Friday." "Friday doesn't magically make money appear in my wallet." She ruffled his hair affectionately. "Maybe this weekend, if Mom gets her paycheck." Daniel pouted, but didn't argue. He was used to not having things, to waiting and hoping and making do. It was just how life was in the Parker household. When they got home, there was a car parked in front of their house. Not just any car either, but a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than their house was worth. Molly felt a chill run down her spine, though she couldn't have said why. "Who's that?" Daniel asked, pointing at the car. "I don't know. Stay behind me." They approached the house cautiously, Molly pushing Daniel behind her as she climbed the porch steps. Through the window, she could see her mother sitting on the couch, her face pale, speaking with a man Molly didn't recognize. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair that was impeccably styled, and a charcoal gray suit that screamed expensive. He was leaning forward in his chair, his posture tense, his eyes fixed on Helen with an intensity that made Molly's skin prickle. She pushed open the door. "Mom, what's going on?" Helen looked up and Molly was startled to see tears streaming down her mother's face. Not sad tears, though. Something else. Something complicated. "Molly." "Daniel. Come in and sit down. There's someone you need to meet." The man in the gray suit stood up and Molly got her first good look at his face. He was handsome in a severe way, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw, his eyes a warm brown that seemed at odds with the hardness of his expression. Those eyes, when they landed on Daniel, went wide with shock. "My God," he breathed. "It's really him." "Who are you?" Molly demanded, stepping in front of Daniel protectively. "What do you want?" The man seemed to collect himself with effort. "My name is Vincent Blackwell, and I believe..." His voice cracked slightly. "I believe that boy behind you is my son." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Daniel, who had been peeking around Molly's shoulder, went very still. "What did you say?" 10 years ago, Vincent continued, his voice steadier now but still thick with emotion. "My wife and I had a son. He was 6 months old when he was taken from us. Kidnapped by someone we trusted. We searched everywhere, hired private investigators, offered rewards, did everything we could think of. But we never found him." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph, worn at the edges from years of handling. He held it out so they could see. It was a baby with dark hair and a familiar smile, wearing a green onesie. Molly felt the floor shift beneath her feet. That's That's the outfit he was wearing, she whispered. When I found him, Vincent nodded, his eyes glistening. The investigators found a lead last month, a woman who matched the description of our former nanny, deceased now, but with a detailed confession in her personal effects. She had taken our son and disposed of him because she believed we had wronged her somehow. She left him to die in a garbage dump, but he didn't die. Helen's voice was barely audible. Molly found him. Yes. Vincent looked at Molly, really looked at her for the first time. You saved my son's life. You were 6 years old, and you saved my son's life. Molly didn't know what to say. Her brain was spinning, trying to make sense of this new reality. Daniel, her Daniel, the little brother she had claimed and protected and loved for 10 years, was actually someone else's child. Someone rich, someone powerful, someone who could give him everything she couldn't. You're going to take him away, she said. It wasn't a question. Vincent's expression flickered. I didn't come here to tear apart a family. I came here to find my son. How we move forward from here. That's something we need to figure out together. He's my brother. Molly's voice was fierce, protective, the same voice she had used as a child when defending Daniel on the playground. I don't care what some DNA test says, I found him. I raised him. He's mine. Her hands were shaking, her jaw set in that stubborn line that Helen knew so well. This was Molly at her most protective, her most dangerous, the girl who had once punched a boy twice her size for calling Daniel names. Daniel, meanwhile, was standing very still, his dark eyes moving back and forth between Vincent and his sister. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The confusion and fear on his face spoke volumes. Vincent saw it too. His expression softened, and when he spoke again, his voice was gentler. I understand your concern, Molly, I really do. I'm not here to take anyone away from their family. I'm here to understand what happened to my son and to thank the people who saved him. Molly, Helen's voice was gentle but firm. Let's hear what Mr. Blackwell has to say. Vincent sat back down, gesturing for them to do the same. After a moment's hesitation, Helen guided Daniel to the couch and Molly followed reluctantly, positioning herself between her brother and this stranger who claimed to be his father. I'm not going to lie to you, Vincent said. My first instinct was to take Daniel and bring him home, to give him the life he should have had all along. But then I learned more about your family, about how you found him and adopted him and raised him with love even though you had nothing. He paused, his eyes moving around the small, shabby living room. I've built companies from the ground up. I've negotiated deals worth billions of dollars. But I've never seen courage like what your daughter showed that day, taking a baby from a garbage dump and bringing him home, convincing her mother to keep him, being a sister to him all these years. She's the best sister ever, Daniel said quietly. It was the first time he had spoken since the revelation. Vincent smiled, a sad, tender expression that transformed his severe face. I can see that. So what do you want? Helen asked. If you're not here to take him away, what do you want? I want to know my son. I want to be part of his life, if he'll let me. And I want. Vincent hesitated as if choosing his words carefully. I want to help your family, not as charity, as gratitude. You gave my son a home when I couldn't find him. You deserve to have everything I can offer. We don't need your money, Molly said sharply. Maybe not, but I'd like to offer it anyway. Vincent leaned forward. I'm not trying to buy anyone. I'm trying to make up for 10 years of missed birthdays and lost opportunities and not being there when my son needed me. If the only way I can do that is by helping the people who were there, then that's what I'll do. Helen looked at her children, then back at Vincent. This is a lot to process, Mr. Blackwell. Vincent, please. Vincent. She took a deep breath. I think we all need some time to think about this. Daniel needs time to process what he's just learned. And you need time to get to know him as he is, not as the baby you lost. You're right, of course. Vincent reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. This is my private number. Call me when you're ready to talk. I'm staying in town for as long as it takes. He stood up to leave, then paused at the door, his eyes finding Daniel one more time. "I've dreamed about this moment for 10 years, he said softly. "Meeting you again. Seeing the person you've become. I never imagined it would happen like this, in a house like this, with a family like this. But looking at you now, at all of you." He smiled, that same sad, tender smile. "I think maybe this is exactly how it was supposed to happen." His hand hesitated on the doorknob as if he couldn't quite bring himself to leave. He turned one more time, his eyes finding Daniel's face, memorizing every detail, every feature, every trace of the baby he had lost so long ago. "I searched for you every single day," Vincent said, his voice breaking. "I hired private investigators. I put up billboards. I appeared on television shows and radio programs, begging anyone with information to come forward. I never stopped looking, not for one day, not for 1 hour." Daniel didn't know what to say. He was 10 years old, and the entire foundation of his life had just crumbled beneath his feet. Everything he thought he knew about himself, about his family, about where he came from, was suddenly in question. "Why?" he asked, the word barely audible. "Why did someone take me?" Vincent's face twisted with pain. "I don't know, son. I've asked myself that question a million times. Margaret, our former nanny, she was troubled. She blamed us for things that weren't our fault. And in her twisted mind, taking you was a way to hurt us." Did she? Did she want me to die? The question hung in the air, heavy and terrible. Helen made a small sound of distress, and Molly moved closer to Daniel, putting her arm around his shoulders. "I don't know what she wanted," Vincent said honestly, "but I know what she got. She got caught. She got justice. And more importantly, she failed. Because you survived. Because a little girl in a pink hoodie found you and brought you home." And then he was gone, leaving behind a silence so thick you could cut it with a knife. Helen sat on the couch, staring at the business card in her hand, trying to process everything that had just happened. Her son, her Daniel, was the kidnapped heir of a billionaire. The baby she had raised and loved and sacrificed for was someone else's child. "Mom?" Daniel's voice was small, uncertain. "Is it true? Am I really his son?" Helen looked at her boy, at this child who had been the center of her world for 10 years, and felt her heart break into a million pieces. "I don't know, sweetheart. We'll need to do tests to be sure. But," she took a deep breath, "but it seems like it might be. Does that mean I have to leave? Do I have to go live with him?" "No." Helen pulled him into her arms, holding him tight. "No one is taking you anywhere. You're my son, Daniel. You'll always be my son. Whatever happens next, we'll figure it out together." Molly sat on the other side of the couch, watching them, her face unreadable. She had been 6 years old when she found Daniel, 6 years old and brave and completely unaware of the consequences of her actions. She had saved a life that day, but she had also started a chain of events that was now threatening to tear her family apart. She didn't regret it. Not for a second. Given the chance, she would do it all again. But she also knew that nothing would ever be the same. The days that followed were strange and surreal. Daniel, to his credit, handled the news with remarkable maturity for a 10-year-old. He asked questions, lots of them, about his birth parents and his kidnapping, and why anyone would leave a baby in a garbage dump. Helen and Molly answered as best they could, though there was much they didn't know. Vincent, true to his word, didn't push. He stayed in town, taking a room at the small motel on Main Street, and he waited. When Daniel was ready to see him, he came over. When Daniel needed space, he gave it. He was patient and careful, and surprisingly humble for a man who was used to getting everything he wanted. "I had a whole speech prepared," he admitted to Helen one evening, while Daniel was doing homework at the kitchen table and Molly was washing dishes in the next room. "About coming to take him back to his rightful home. About all the things I could give him that you can't. About being his real father." "What changed your mind?" "Meeting him. Meeting all of you." Vincent shook his head. "He's not the baby I lost, Helen. He's a 10-year-old boy with a life and a family and a sister who would clearly die for him. I can't undo the last 10 years. I can't pretend they didn't happen. All I can do is try to be part of his future." Helen studied him for a long moment. She had expected a billionaire CEO to be arrogant and demanding, to sweep in and try to buy her son with money and lawyers. Instead, she found a man who was grieving and grateful and genuinely trying to do the right thing. "Your wife," she said carefully. "You mentioned she passed away?" Vincent's expression clouded. 3 years ago. Cancer. She never stopped looking for him, you know. Even when everyone told us to give up hope, she kept searching. It broke her, not knowing what happened to him. And in the end, I think that's what killed her. I'm sorry. So am I. She would have loved him so much. He glanced at Daniel, who was bent over his math homework, tongue poking out in concentration. She would have loved all of you, I think. She had a soft spot for people who did the right thing even when it was hard. From the kitchen doorway, Molly listened to this exchange without being seen. She had been wary of Vincent at first, protective of her brother and suspicious of this wealthy stranger who had appeared out of nowhere. But hearing him talk about his wife, seeing the pain in his eyes and the genuine affection in his voice when he spoke about Daniel, she felt something shift in her chest. Maybe he wasn't the enemy. Maybe he was just another person who loved her brother. Maybe, just maybe, they could figure this out together. The weeks turned into months, and Vincent became a fixture in their lives. He came to Daniel's soccer games and school plays. He helped Molly with her college applications, pulling strings at universities she could never have afforded on her own. He fixed the leaky roof and replaced the drafty windows and filled the refrigerator with food whenever it started to look empty. "You don't have to do all this," Helen told him one evening after he had spent the entire day installing a new water heater. "I know." Vincent wiped his hands on a rag, leaving streaks of grease across the expensive fabric of his shirt. "But I want to." "Why?" He paused, considering the question. "Because you gave my son a home when he had nothing. Because you raised him to be kind and curious and happy. Because every time I look at him, I see the life he could have had, stolen away by someone I trusted, and the life he did have, given to him by people who had no reason to care." He met her eyes. "Because you're a remarkable woman, Helen Parker. And I'm starting to think that finding Daniel was only half the miracle." Helen felt heat rise to her cheeks. She was 45 years old, worn down by decades of hard work and harder choices. She had long since stopped thinking of herself as someone men noticed, let alone someone a billionaire would find remarkable. She had been alone for so long. Since Molly's father left, since the dreams of a normal family crumbled to dust, she had focused everything on her children, on survival, on getting through each day without falling apart. She had forgotten what it felt like to be seen as a woman, not just a mother. To have someone look at her the way Vincent was looking at her now, with admiration and desire, and something that looked terrifyingly like love. "Vincent, I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable, I'm just being honest." He smiled, that crooked, self-deprecating smile that she had come to know so well over the past few months. "I've spent my whole life chasing success, building an empire, acquiring things. But the happiest I've been in years is sitting in this kitchen, watching you cook dinner and listening to Daniel talk about his day." "You could have anyone," Helen said softly. "Models, actresses, women who are younger and prettier and none of them would have taken a baby out of a garbage dump and loved him like their own. None of them would have worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over their children's heads. None of them would have raised a daughter like Molly, who is so fiercely protective of her family that she scared me half to death the first time we met." Vincent reached out and took her hand. "I don't want anyone, Helen. I want you." It was too much. Too fast. Too impossible. And yet, when Helen looked into his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in a very long time. Hope. The kiss happened on a Thursday evening in October, exactly 1 year after Vincent had first appeared on their doorstep. They were standing on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, When Vincent turned to Helen and asked if he could kiss her. Not took. Asked. Like a gentleman. Like someone who understood that her trust had been hard won and easily lost. She said yes. The kiss was soft and sweet and completely unexpected in its intensity. Helen had forgotten what it felt like to be wanted, to be cherished, to be seen as something other than a mother and a worker and a survivor. But Vincent saw all of those things and more. "You," said a voice from the doorway. They jumped apart to find Molly and Daniel standing in the entrance, identical expressions of amused disgust on their faces. "Really, Mom?" Molly shook her head. "On the porch? Where the neighbors can see?" "We weren't, it wasn't." Helen's face was crimson. "It's cool," Daniel said with a shrug. "I kind of figured this would happen eventually. Vincent looks at you the way the guys at school look at pizza." That's not exactly a compliment, buddy," Vincent said, though he was smiling. "Pizza is the best thing ever. So yeah, it is." Molly rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her own smile. "Just don't be gross about it, okay? There are children present." "You're 16, Helen pointed out. "Exactly. Too young to witness my mother making out with a billionaire on the porch." Vincent laughed, a real laugh that echoed across the darkening yard. "I promised to keep the porch activities to a minimum. Inside activities, however." "La la la," Molly clapped her hands over Daniel's ears. "I can't hear you. No one said anything about inside activities." They were all laughing now, the awkwardness dissolving into the easy warmth that had become the hallmark of their strange, blended family. Helen looked at them, at her daughter and her son and this man who had somehow become part of their lives, and felt her heart swell with something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Joy. The engagement came 6 months later. Vincent proposed in the most un-billionaire way possible, in the kitchen of the Parker house while Helen was making pancakes for breakfast, with Daniel cheering and Molly pretending not to cry. "I know this isn't what you expected," Vincent said, down on one knee, holding up a ring that probably cost more than the house. "I know I come with complications and baggage and a life that's very different from what you're used to. But I also know that I've never been happier than I am with you and your children. I want to make this official. I want to be a family. Will you marry me?" Helen looked at the ring, then at Vincent, then at her children. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Daniel whooped and threw his arms around Vincent's neck. Molly hugged her mother, tears streaming down her face despite her best efforts to hide them. "I can't believe my mom is marrying a billionaire," she said, laughing through her tears. "I can't believe a billionaire wants to marry your mom," Helen replied. "Hey," Vincent protested, "I'm standing right here." "Get used to it," Molly advised. "Parker women don't pull their punches." "I wouldn't have it any other way." The wedding was held 3 months later, in the garden of Vincent's sprawling estate in the countryside. Helen had never seen anything so beautiful. The garden was transformed into a wonderland of white roses and twinkling lights, with an archway of flowers marking the spot where they would exchange their vows. There were chairs set up on the lawn for the guests, and a string quartet playing softly in the corner, and a reception tent that looked like something out of a fairy tale. "You don't have to do all this," she had protested when Vincent had shown her the plans. "A simple ceremony would be fine." "Nothing about you is simple, Helen Parker, and nothing about our wedding should be either." He had kissed her forehead, that gentle, tender gesture that she had come to love. "Let me give you the wedding you deserve," and so she had relented. And now, standing in a small room off the main house wearing a white dress that cost more than she had made in a year at the diner, she felt like someone else entirely, like a princess in a fairy tale, waiting for her happy ending. Molly appeared in the doorway looking beautiful in a pale blue bridesmaid dress that matched her eyes. "Mom, they're ready for you." Helen took a deep breath. "I'm nervous." "Why? You love him. He loves you. This is what happens next." "I know, but it's all happening so fast. A year ago, we were barely surviving. And now we're getting everything we deserve." Molly crossed the room and took her mother's hands. "You spent your whole life sacrificing for us, Mom, working yourself to the bone, giving up everything you wanted so we could have what we needed. It's time for someone to take care of you for a change. Helen felt tears prick at her eyes. When did you get so wise? I've had a good teacher. They hugged, mother and daughter, two women who had been through so much together and were about to start a new chapter. Let's do this, Helen said. It was a small ceremony, just close friends and family, but it was beautiful. Helen wore a simple white dress that made her look like the young woman she had once been, full of hope and possibility. Vincent wore a suit that actually fit for once, without the armor of corporate formality. Daniel served as ring-bearer, proudly carrying the bands down the aisle. Molly stood beside her mother as maid of honor, trying not to cry and failing spectacularly. I, Vincent Blackwell, take you, Helen Parker, to be my wife, to love and cherish in sickness and health for richer or poorer, for as long as we both shall live. I, Helen Parker, take you, Vincent Blackwell, to be my husband, to love and cherish in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, for as long as we both shall live. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. The kiss was longer this time, and sweeter, and no one made gagging noises because even teenagers know when to shut up. Later at the reception, Vincent stood up to make a toast. 10 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the garden, I lost my son. For a decade, I searched for him, hoping against hope that he was still alive, that someday I would find him. But I never imagined I would find him like this. He looked at Daniel, who was stuffing his face with wedding cake and pretending not to listen. I never imagined I would find him in a small, shabby house at the end of a dirt road, raised by a woman with more courage than I'll ever have. I never imagined I would find him with a sister who loved him so fiercely that she scared me half to death the first time we met. I never imagined I would find him happy and healthy and whole, despite everything that happened to him. He turned to Molly, who was determinedly not crying. Molly, you were 6 years old when you found Daniel in that garbage dump. You could have walked away. You could have ignored him. You could have let someone else deal with it. But you didn't. You picked him up and carried him home and begged your mother to keep him. And because of that, my son is alive today. Son. Now Molly was crying, her attempts to hold back tears completely abandoned. I owe you everything, Vincent continued. I owe your mother everything, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to repay that debt. He raised his glass. To Helen, my wife, who showed me that family isn't about blood or money or status. It's about love. It's about showing up. It's about choosing each other over and over again even when it's hard. To Helen, the guests echoed, and to Molly, my stepdaughter, who I am proud to call my own. You have the heart of a lion and the stubbornness of a mule, and I wouldn't change a single thing about you. Molly laughed through her tears. Gee, thanks. And to Daniel, my son, who I lost and found again. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Daniel had stopped eating cake and was looking at Vincent with an expression that was too mature for a 10-year-old. To family, Vincent concluded. However you find it, however you make it. To family. To family. The clinking of glasses echoed across the garden, a chorus of celebration and hope and new beginnings. The years that followed were a whirlwind of change and growth and unexpected joy. The Blackwells, as they were now called, moved into Vincent's estate, but they brought the Parker spirit with them. Helen insisted on keeping their old house, renovating it into a community center for families in need. Molly started a scholarship fund for students who came from difficult backgrounds. Daniel, when he was old enough, began volunteering at a local shelter for abandoned children. We know what it's like to have nothing, Helen explained to a reporter who was writing a profile on the family's charitable work. We know what it's like to be overlooked and dismissed and written off. So we want to make sure that no one else has to feel that way. The reporter, who had expected to find a typical billionaire trophy wife, was clearly taken aback by Helen's down-to-earth demeanor and genuine passion. And your husband? Does he share this commitment? More than you know. Helen smiled. Vincent spent 10 years searching for his son. He knows what it's like to lose someone you love, to not know if they're alive or dead. That kind of experience changes a person. It makes you appreciate what you have and want to give back to those who have less. The profile, when it was published, painted a picture of a family that had found each other against all odds and used their good fortune to lift others up. It went viral, inspiring thousands of donations to their foundation and countless messages of support from people who had been touched by their story. But not everyone was happy about the Blackwells' good fortune. Vincent's extended family, who had been circling like vultures ever since his wife died, were furious when he remarried. They had expected to inherit his fortune, to take control of his company, to finally get what they believed they deserved. Instead, they got Helen. "She's a gold digger," Vincent's sister Margaret declared at a family dinner, not bothering to lower her voice. "A common woman who got lucky and sank her claws into you the moment she saw an opportunity." "That common woman raised my son for 10 years, Vincent replied, his voice icy. "That common woman gave him a home when he had nothing. That common woman is worth more than every person at this table combined. She's after your money. Then she's doing a terrible job of it, considering she donates most of what I give her to charity." Vincent stood up. "I'm done, Margaret. Done with this family's pettiness and greed and constant attempts to control my life. Helen and her children are my family now. And if you can't accept that, then you're welcome to leave." Margaret sputtered, but Vincent was already walking away, Helen on his arm, their children trailing behind them. "That was dramatic," Molly observed as they drove home. "That was necessary," Vincent corrected. "Those people have been poisoning my life for too long. It's time to cut them out." "Won't they cause trouble?" Daniel asked, looking worried. "Probably. But we'll deal with it together. That's what families do." The trouble came faster than any of them expected. Vincent's sister Margaret had never liked Helen. From the moment she learned about the marriage, she had made her displeasure known in ways both subtle and overt. Snide comments at family gatherings, whispered conversations that stopped whenever Helen walked into a room, pointed questions about prenuptial agreements and financial arrangements. "She's after your money," Margaret had told Vincent at a family dinner, speaking loudly enough for everyone at the table to hear. "Can't you see that? A poor woman with 2 children, suddenly attached to a billionaire? It's the oldest story in the book." Vincent had defended Helen, of course. He had cut Margaret off and told her that her opinions were neither wanted nor welcome. But the damage was done. The battle lines had been drawn. And Margaret, who had spent her entire life feeling entitled to the Blackwell fortune, was not the type to give up easily. 3 months after the confrontation, Margaret filed a lawsuit challenging Vincent's marriage and his decision to make Daniel his legal heir. She claimed that Helen had manipulated Vincent, that Daniel wasn't really his son, that the whole thing was an elaborate scheme to steal the Blackwell fortune. The case made headlines exactly as Margaret had intended. "Billionaire's family torn apart by gold digger wife," screamed the tabloids. "Orphan heir or elaborate hoax," demanded the gossip sites. It was ugly and painful and exactly the kind of public spectacle that Helen had always dreaded. But she didn't run. She didn't hide. She stood by her husband and her children and faced the accusations head on. "I didn't marry Vincent for his money," she told the cameras that had gathered outside the courthouse on the first day of the trial. "I married him because he's a good man, who loves my children and treats me with respect. If Margaret Blackwell can't accept that, that's her problem, not mine." The trial lasted 2 weeks. DNA tests confirmed that Daniel was indeed Vincent's biological son. Financial records showed that Helen had donated more money than she had kept. Witnesses testified to the genuine love and affection that existed between all members of the Blackwell family. In the end, the judge dismissed the case with prejudice, calling it a malicious attempt to destroy a family that has shown nothing but love and generosity. Margaret was ordered to pay all legal fees and was publicly reprimanded for wasting the court's time. Her reputation was destroyed, her social standing shattered, and she found herself shunned by the very people she had been trying to impress. It was, Helen thought, a fitting end to a petty woman's petty schemes. But the real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the family that had been forged in the fire of that trial. They had been tested, and they had not been found wanting. They had stood together, held together, loved each other through the worst that Margaret could throw at them. And they had come out stronger on the other side. "Justice," Daniel declared as they walked out of the courthouse, cameras flashing all around them. "That's what this is, justice." "How do you know that word?" Molly asked. "I'm 11. I know lots of words." "Like what?" "Like insufferable, which is what you're being right now." "Hey." But they were both laughing, the tension of the past few weeks dissolving in the warm October sunshine. Vincent put his arm around Helen. "Thank you," he said softly, "for standing by me through this. Where else would I be?" She looked up at him with eyes full of love. "You're my husband, we're a family, that means something." "Yes," Vincent agreed, pulling her close. "It means everything." 20 years had passed since a 6-year-old girl found a baby in a garbage dump. It was hard to believe sometimes how much had changed. Helen would wake up in her beautiful bedroom in her beautiful house next to her beautiful husband, and she would have to remind herself that this was real, that she wasn't dreaming, that she had somehow gone from scrubbing toilets in office buildings to hosting charity galas and serving on the boards of foundations. But she never forgot where she came from, never forgot the little house at the end of the dirt road, the cold winters and the empty cupboards, the endless struggle to keep her family fed and housed and together. Those memories kept her grounded, kept her humble, kept her grateful for every blessing that had come her way. And there had been so many blessings. The Parker Blackwell family had grown and changed in ways none of them could have imagined on that rainy October day so long ago. But the core of who they were, the love and loyalty and fierce protectiveness that had defined them from the beginning, remained exactly the same. Molly was 36 now, a successful lawyer who specialized in cases involving abandoned and neglected children. She had taken her own story and turned it into a career, fighting for kids who had no one else to fight for them. "I know what it's like to find a child who's been thrown away," she often said when people asked why she did what she did. "I know what it feels like to save a life. And I want to make sure that every child who needs saving has someone in their corner." She was married now to a man named James who was gentle and kind and utterly devoted to her. They had 2 children of their own, a boy and a girl, who called Daniel Uncle Danny and begged for stories about the baby in the garbage dump every time they visited. Daniel was 30, a graduate of Harvard Business School, working alongside his father at the helm of Blackwell Industries. He had grown into a remarkable man, tall and handsome with his father's sharp mind and his adopted mother's kind heart. But he hadn't forgotten where he came from. He visited the old dump site, now a beautiful park, every year on the anniversary of his rescue. He kept a framed photograph of 6-year-old Molly in her pink hoodie on his desk at work, and he had established a foundation in his birth mother's name, dedicated to finding missing children and reuniting families. The foundation had helped locate over 1,000 children in the past decade, bringing closure to families who had lost hope. It operated search teams, funded DNA databases, and provided support services for families dealing with the trauma of a missing child. It was, by any measure, one of the most successful charitable organizations of its kind. But for Daniel, it was personal. Every child found was a victory. Every family reunited was a reminder of what could have been and what was. "I was one of the lucky ones," he said in interviews. "I was found by someone who loved me, someone who didn't walk away. Not everyone is that fortunate. So I'm doing what I can to change that." He had married a woman named Sarah, a pediatrician he had met at a charity event. And together they had a son of their own. A little boy with Daniel's dark hair and his grandmother Helen's kind eyes, named after the grandfather he would never meet, Michael Parker Blackwell. The next generation of a family that had been built on love and chance and a little girl's courage. Helen was 65, her hair gray now, but her eyes still bright with the kindness that had defined her entire life. She had retired from the day-to-day operations of the family's charitable work, but she still made appearances at events and still got emotional every time she told the story of the rainy day that had changed everything. "I almost said no," she admitted to a room full of donors at the foundation's annual gala. "When Molly came home with that baby soaking wet and terrified and begging me to keep him, I almost said no. We had nothing. Less than nothing. I didn't know how I was going to feed another mouth or where I was going to find the time and energy to care for an infant. She paused, her voice catching. Voice. But I looked at my daughter's face and I saw something there. Something fierce and determined and absolutely unwilling to accept defeat. And I thought, if a 6-year-old can have that kind of courage, maybe I can too. She looked at Daniel, who was sitting in the front row with his wife and their newborn son. That was the best decision I ever made. Taking a chance on a baby I found in the garbage because that baby grew up to be the most remarkable man I know. And somewhere along the way, I found another remarkable man who decided to love all of us, despite our messy history and our unconventional beginnings. Vincent, sitting beside her on the stage, reached over and took her hand. We're not a normal family, Helen continued. We didn't come together in the usual way. But I think that's what makes us special. We chose each other, we fought for each other, and we never ever gave up. She raised her glass. To the power of choice. To the courage of a 6-year-old girl. And to families, however you find them. 2 families, the crowd echoed. Later that night, after the gala was over and the guests had gone home, the Blackwells gathered in the garden of the estate for a private celebration. It was a tradition they had started years ago, this annual gathering of the original family on the anniversary of the day Molly had found Daniel. 20 years, Vincent said, looking around at the faces illuminated by candlelight. 20 years since a little girl in a pink hoodie changed all of our lives. I still have that hoodie, Molly admitted. It doesn't fit anymore, obviously, but I kept it. It reminds me of who I was and what I did and why it mattered. You were so brave, Daniel said. I don't think I've ever told you that properly. I was a baby, so I don't remember anything. But hearing the story now, as an adult, as a father myself, I can't imagine the courage it took to wade into that garbage and pick up a stranger's child and bring him home. You weren't a stranger, Molly said softly. You were mine. From the moment I saw you, you were mine. Daniel reached over and hugged his sister, this woman who had saved his life before he was even old enough to understand what that meant. Thank you, he whispered, for everything. Thank you for being worth saving, Molly whispered back. Helen and Vincent exchanged a look, the kind of look that comes from 20 years of shared history and hard-won understanding. I spent a decade searching for my son, Vincent said, but what I found was so much more than I ever imagined. A wife, a daughter, a family that loves each other not because they have to, but because they choose to. He stood up and raised his glass. To Helen, who taught me that love doesn't care about money or status. To Molly, who taught me that courage comes in all sizes. And to Daniel, who taught me that it's never too late to find your way home. To all of us, Helen added, and to the next 20 years. They clinked their glasses together, the sound ringing out across the garden like a promise. A promise of more joy to come, more challenges to face, more love to share. A promise that no matter what happened, they would face it together. Because that's what families do. Later, after everyone else had gone to bed, Vincent found Helen sitting alone on the terrace, wrapped in a blanket, looking up at the stars. Can't sleep? He asked, settling into the chair beside her. Just thinking. About what? About everything. About that rainy day 20 years ago when Molly came running home with a baby in her arms. About how scared I was. How sure I was that we couldn't take on another mouth to feed. About how close I came to saying no. But you didn't. No, I didn't. Helen smiled softly. And look where we are now. Vincent reached over and took her hand. Do you ever regret it, any of it? Not for a second. Not. She turned to look at him, this man who had walked into her life and changed everything. I would do it all again. Every struggle, every hardship, every moment of doubt. Because it all led here. To this. To us. I love you, Helen Blackwell. I love you too, Vincent Blackwell. They sat there together, hand in hand, watching the stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a family out of love and determination and a little girl's brave heart. It wasn't the life either of them had planned, but it was the life they had chosen, and that made all the difference. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Helen and Vincent sat on the porch of their home, watching the stars come out one by one. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened?" Helen asked. "If Molly had taken a different path that day? If she hadn't found Daniel?" "Sometimes," Vincent admitted, "but then I remember that wondering is pointless. We can't change the past. We can only be grateful for what it gave us." "And what did it give us?" "Everything." He took her hand. "It gave me everything. A son I thought I'd lost forever. A daughter who showed me what real courage looks like. And a wife who makes every day feel like the best day of my life." "You're getting sentimental in your old age," Helen teased. "I'm getting honest in my old age. There's a difference." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the crickets and the wind and the soft sounds of their home settling around them. "I love you," Helen said finally. "I love you too." "Even when I burn dinner?" "Especially when you burn dinner. It reminds me that you're human." "I'm very human. Ask Molly. She'll give you a whole list of my faults." Vincent laughed. "I don't need a list. I already know all your faults, and I love you anyway." "Good answer. I've been practicing." They kissed then, a soft, sweet kiss that tasted like 20 years of happiness and a lifetime of gratitude. Inside the house, the next generation was already dreaming. Michael, Daniel's young son, slept peacefully in his crib, unaware of the incredible story that had brought his family together. Someday, when he was old enough to understand, they would tell him about his Aunt Molly, who had been only 6 years old when she found a baby in the garbage and refused to leave him there. About his grandmother Helen, who had sacrificed everything to raise a child that wasn't hers by blood. About his grandfather Vincent, who had searched for 10 years and never given up hope. They would tell him that family wasn't about where you came from, but about who chose to love you. That sometimes the most powerful bonds were forged not by blood, but by choice. That a single act of kindness performed by a child too young to understand its significance could ripple forward through the decades and change the lives of generations yet unborn. And somewhere in the house, Daniel smiled in his sleep, dreaming of a rainy day and a girl in a pink hoodie and the moment his life was saved. He didn't remember it, of course. He had been too young. But the story had been told so many times in so many ways that it had become part of him. A foundational myth. A creation story. The story of how a 6-year-old girl found a baby in the garbage and decided to love him anyway. The story of how love, in all its messy, unconventional glory, had the power to transform tragedy into triumph. The story of how family wasn't about blood or money or where you came from. It was about showing up. It was about choosing each other. It was about refusing to give up no matter how hard things got. It was about love, and in the end, that was all that mattered. The end.